Mm.
So yeah,
Hmm.
and we have uh been exploring quite a bit about what's going on in the gaming world, the tabletop gaming world. Jacoy and I, originally when Jacoy and I came together, we were like, oh, we'll share about adventures and miniature painting and all these things we love about the gaming world. And then it seemed like every time we would turn around, whether it was, WotC doing something dumb or Paizo or whatever, uh, it just seemed like there was this steady barrage of ideology coming out of the larger gaming companies. And I think like the first video that Dracoy and I did was a video where WotC was committing to curating the language and pushing everything through sensitivity readers for the new core books coming out in 2024. And they were removing words like savage and civilization because now you're making judgments on who's civilized and who's not. Slavery was
Right.
chopped off there. And I, you know, I kind of take strong objection to that myself because it seems like what we see in the greater culture war, where leading up to the big explosion of of the culture war, we saw like all of these arguments being architected, like you shouldn't, this is a microaggression, don't do that. And it escalated a little bit further and to the point where like, you can't speak up if you're this demographic. And the reason is because of all
Right.
these arguments that everyone's already agreed on before that are microaggressions. Therefore, you can't say anything when we call you names, right? Um, and so
Yeah.
it felt like the start of that all over again, but in gaming.
Have
And
you
I don't,
guys had that feeling yourselves?
yeah, I kind
Oh,
of,
yeah, definitely.
yeah, I'm kind of wondering
I mean,
what your take is
go ahead, Matt.
on that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is essentially um, gaming should be an apolitical space. That's my belief, and to, and it's all about it's kind of invading your personal space if you're using these supplements that are espousing kind of ideological narratives and yeah, the danger in that. I mean, we've all played long enough that we can kind of go our own way, but we want this culture to continue, right? And it's going to change or affect who's going to go get into this hobby. Um, Essentially, it's going to drive. They're driving a narrative, and the people who see this might be turned off, and some might be okay. This is for me, but what we want is kind of as broad a population as we can get in this game. It just makes it more interesting, and we don't want to limit who can or who feels comfortable in the space and who doesn't.
Well, I think that's what WotC's intentions were when it comes to implementing things like safety tools and removing a lot of these words. So, do you think that their changes are doing exactly that, or do you think it's actually prohibiting like more people from joining the games?
Well, I think it's prohibiting some people. It's making some people more comfortable, and I think that's kind of their goal is comfort, right? Is to make people comfortable in the space, and that's a noble effort if that's truly what they're after, if that's what they're trying to do. But at the same time, it's kind of alienating maybe an older subsection of the culture where we grew up on this and we feel as though we didn't need any of that. And we were just happy being in an apolitical space. And so I guess what we have to think about is comfort the the main thing that we're after here? Is that the goal? Because often we're exploring, we're pushing our boundaries when we're playing D&D. You know, we're using our imaginations. You know, we're experimenting with different moral things, and yeah, maybe not. Maybe comfort isn't the main thing that we should be striving for.
Yeah, I wonder how, attuned to their customer base WotC truly is. Um, we've mentioned, Jacoy and I have had several videos where we talk about the different polls where they're gathering demographic information. And the polls are all held online, which means it's the demographics are going to be skewed towards the younger generation anyway because they spend most of the time online. The older players, they may be
Sure.
online, but like you said, they're pretty comfortable with what they're doing. And so they they're not going out to WotC's website to look up anything, and they're not really going to YouTube to look for advice because they've got their routine down, if you will. And so right away there seems to be a bias in the information they draw. And it really makes me wonder when WotC says, hey, it seems like our customer base wants safety over anything else. um, it makes me wonder uh, if they realize that their data might be flawed. And I think it goes back into, like, for example, making the Underdark a bit more like the surface world. Like they're talking about having the evil become the exception rather than good in the Underdark, and
Mm.
the removing of and that was one of the other things they kind of curated. It all came out in the same article, was that mind flayers and beholders, they're very xenophobic. They want to destroy everything that's not like them or enslave everything that's not like them.
Right.
And um so if they want to get rid of those concepts, it's almost like they're turning mind flayers and beholders into like Adam West Batman villains, right? Because what is the villainy? What is the conflict? What is it that the adventurers need to foil at that point? And um, you know, and I know that the 2024 Monster Manual isn't out yet, but we've seen some examples from the new Monster Manual. Um, and one of the things they were gonna do was eliminate alignment, but it seems like alignment's still in all the examples that they're giving. Um, I
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's when you get into this, it kind of seems as though it's acting as a social commentary within the game, and we're really in this for escapism, right? I mean, that's
Right.
that's I don't want to be dealing with this stuff. You know, I live in the real world, and like I'm not partial to it. So when I go into the D&D space or the TTRPG space, I want escapism. And I don't know if this is an appropriate venue for educating people. Is at a certain point, it seems like, with the Sly Flourish thing that's gone on, it's like, is this a venue? Are we educating people now? Are we teaching people lessons, or are we playing a game? Because, like I have a lot of ideas politically, and all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the game, and I don't infuse our products with that. And I'm in no position to be teaching anyone anything. And I don't think designers are either. So it's best left untouched, I think, because there's a lot of room for missteps. If you're trying to educate someone, especially distilling broad ideas and cultural issues, distilling it into a TTRPG game, there's so much room for missteps, and I just don't think it's an appropriate venue. I don't think video games are, and I don't think role playing games are.
I'll agree to that. Definitely as a woman in this space, I really resent the changes that have happened because I think that their argument is they're trying to make everything more inclusive so that people like myself are more comfortable. But the matter of the fact is, I was perfectly happy with the things the way they were, and I didn't ask for some guy to come in and rescue me in the space and change things so that I'm suddenly more comfortable. I was fine.
Yeah, and it seems like, if we're talking about creating a product that appeals to the a wider audience, you really got to wonder if removing points of conflict from a game, because like it or not, like the old timers are going to be like, and by old timers I mean like anybody who started before 2014, really. But they're going to have their idea of what constitutes a great adventure and constitutes a great campaign. But as people learn going forward, like, if I'm a brand new player, I'm 16, I pick up the book and I start reading about all these things, am I going to be inspired to run a game to, uh, create a whirlwind adventure, as Donkey would say, and I just think that it's going to, in the long run, harm the product and harm Dungeons and Dragons. But I could be wrong. The a big a big issue I have is, it kind of leads back to what Jacoya says about having somebody else save us, um, because our videos, and granted, you know, over time, general attitudes and positions will curate the audience for us. So people who generally agree with us are going to subscribe, and the people who don't are going to ignore us. But when we first got started, we had a pretty good mix, and uh, I thought it was interesting, the number of people who were like, I'm a leftist, and but I still don't agree with this. So, and it kind of like, and
Mm.
and it's kind of interesting, but the number of people who would comment kind of angry messages about us opposing the idea of making the game safer and gentler for everyone, um really struggled with the implications of that. Like, okay, you've made this beautiful utopia, but what does that mean in 5 or 10 years to the people who we want to pass the game on to? Is it going to be? It's not.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not going to be as cool as the latest video game where they're slaughtering people at an airport, or like we've seen some pretty crazy stuff come out of the video game industry. And I know
Right.
that they're having their own deal, but there's still quite a bit of very extremely violent and crazy material coming out of that genre. So, I don't know if they realize that WotC, that they're competing in a growingly digital world, and they have to compete against and keep the attention of these kids, really, as the years go by. And and I understand that that's probably why they're going to the VTT, but I've constantly
Yeah.
argued that, like, without an edge, without a great story, and world breaking adventure hooks, really, why not just play an MMO?
Well,
Well,
without
that's the thing, and
conflict,
it's sorry. Go
go
ahead.
on.
Um, yeah, I'm just thinking that the edginess is what got me into Dungeons and Dragons. You know, it wasn't the comfort or the safety. It was yeah, it was the mid '80s, and I had heard all sorts of horrible things about it, and I'm like, oh, okay, and just really got into it that way, and yeah, just played it that way, and we always felt like you're kind of getting away with something playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know, maybe it was just that generation, and maybe different generations need different drawing cards. Like maybe comfort and safety is going to be the drawing card to Dungeons and Dragons going forward. But I just kind of like that edginess, and yeah, it just seems like that is an important part of Dungeons and Dragons. You know, just that anything could happen kind of feeling.
Well, without conflict, you can't really have growth. And by them taking away a lot of this conflict and turmoil in this world and making sure everyone's perfectly safe all the time, you can't make mistakes and learn. Not to say that Dungeons and Dragons can't be an amazing tool for a lot of different people to learn social skills or conflict management or communication. I think it's a great tool for that. But in order to have and create those skills, you do need conflict so that you can learn from that. And I think that WotC's making a
So
lot of
true.
mistakes, including like what they've done with their new book.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you know, like to touch on that, Dan and I have both used TTRPGs in educational and therapeutic settings because we both work in mental health, and Dan's a teacher, and we've used that to great effect. And you know, like we'd used 5E to do that, and but you know, as rules change and make things a bit more comfortable, that if you're going to use it in a educational or therapeutic environment, the rules affect what you're going to address, and the more comfort that's involved, it's not going to be as effective. And yeah, so that's just touching on what you were talking about, but it's an important thing to consider. Without conflict, there's you don't have much.
Dan, do you have anything to add with that? Especially with your experience as a teacher.
Yeah, I think the thing that has been a bit bizarre is that there's this shift towards needing to coach dungeon masters about what they can and can't include in their games. And I guess it this is maybe a little too harsh, but like my thought is like stay in your lane. Your job is to provide me this tool set that I'm going to use to construct stories, and I'm going to make judgments about what is going to work with the players I'm with based on their age, based on how well I know them, based on if they're part of my community or whatnot. And I think dungeon masters have been doing that since the 70s. Like you just make judgments, and there's bad dungeon masters out there, and people
Sure.
leave their games. That's not going to change with this new set of parameters. Really, what I think is going to change is there's going to be this chilling effect upon what kinds of stories are coming into the public sphere, the intensity of the content that they deal with. And I think what I'm hearing you folks say, which I fundamentally agree with, is that our world is full of tricky problems that we want players to be able to interact with. Like we have more slaves living in the world today than we did during the early Americas. Slavery is still a problem.
It
Let
is.
there be evil slavers in your world because that's a real problem that we're dealing with today. So kind of dumbing down the content and say, well, we can't talk about that because that's going to offend someone's sensibilities. I really think that the person that loses out is your average player at the average table. So yeah, I see it as a development that has all the right justifications on paper. We're trying to get more people into this space. We're trying to be inclusive. I agree with Cam in saying, yeah, those are noble aspirations to have. But the question is, how are you rolling that out and what's it coming at the cost of? Because if it's coming at the cost of deep storytelling that's actually teaching people about the nuances of good and evil and how you go through the world and what goodness actually looks like, no, get rid of that stuff. We want people to actually struggle with these issues at the table. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and then what they've been doing and saying about Gary Gygax and a lot of the founders of D&D in general, that's been outrageous. I think that they've been building their new game basically off of the bodies of our founders and their reputation.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's
Well,
this.
that's the thing is,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cam. Go ahead.
well, like Dan and I are always saying, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. We're using what they've done and implementing it in our own way, but never for a second do we ever consider, presentism. Like we say, presentism is a hell of a drug, where we just, oh well, we're in 2025. Gary Gygax thought this, so he was a terrible man. You know,
And
no,
that's
people are going to say that about us in 25 years,
yeah.
One day, yeah.
Well, and that's
or tomorrow.
well, and that's something that I have every time someone has come out against Gary Gygax, they're like, okay, so here's this sentence he said. Yes, of course I'm a misogynist. And it's like, see, he said it himself, boom, and it's over. And then you're like, okay, well, here's the full quote, and it's pretty clear that when you read that, he's being very hyperbolic and trying to be humorous, which doesn't come off real well off on
Right.
paper. But the big thing that just drives me crazy is how WotC will say, "Well, we never actually called them these names." Though what they'll do is like, "Oh, Dave Arneson, Gary Gygax, and others, Rob Kuntz or whoever, created this game." And then, like a few paragraphs later, the creatives were misogynist white men from, it's like, well, we never directly said which ones we were talking about. It could be any one of them. Certainly, one of them is a misogynist, right? So what we said is factual.
Right.
But I think it all started with this. It all started with them tagging um, all of the old TSR, and I think even third edition products with that. We know that language such as this was wrong then and wrong now. Like this disclaimer protesting their innocence and their reformity, right? Uh,
Right.
but the I was surprised by the number of people who were like, it doesn't hurt anything. But it really set up the groundwork for some crazy, slanderous moments, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Thaco the clown. Don't forget that one, right?
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty clear what they thought of the old timers. And I think that they would be surprised at the number of not just, you know, 50-year-olds playing 5e, but when I was running programs at the local game stores to bolster the game, we had quite a few people in their 60s and 70s. So it was a little shocking that they would do anything that would that might alienate a customer, right?
Yeah.
But that idea of safety and comfort seems to only extend so far.
Yeah, but to your point, right? Like that's just mudslinging. And like why why is that in our game space? Like it's again a bit bizarre that we're trying to create this rule set for collective storytelling where in my view the goal should be bridge building, that you should be able to have lots of different types of people at your table. And then these I view them as needless kind of attacks upon the progenitors of the hobby. And it's been going on for quite some time. It's as you pointed out, it's in these disclaimers before books. You see it in the characters that are being created. Uh, it's weird. I don't know. It seems to be something that's become fashionable to do in the publishing industry.
Have
Yeah,
you
and I know it's not just RPGs, in the children's book industry. I know some Judy Blume books, they removed the word fat, changed it to something else, like actually changing the words of an author who's,
Mm.
And I think they were trying to do the same thing with Shel Silverstein, but that estate stood up to them and stopped them.